Hey guys, doing a quick demonstration example here of entities, components, how they can all interact with each other and stuff like that. I gave a quick example of how that all can work together in the prior video, but we can go a little bit more in depth here. And in this level I have a various spread of example objects, including the object I'm currently in control of, which is pretty much a stand-in for a player object. It works like a third-person orbital cam, turns in the direction that you push, irrespective of the camera rotation. And then we can hit a button, go into first-person view, and we can run around, and it behaves pretty much as we do expect. You can jump, though it's obviously pretty extreme. And then we can also do stuff like having, say, our house, and as per the post, you can do stuff like have collisions, and if we crack open the editor and select our object, and show the physics world, we can see that this house has collision meshes based on the art file. So what this is doing is, for our entity, if we scroll down over here, our entity has the mesh component with the house model picked for the asset, and then a collision component, which is set to use the visible mesh in this case, but it can also be set to use the collision mesh, simply the bounds, no collisions at all, which would allow you to do stuff like only hitting with projectiles and being able to walk through stuff. And then we have things like this, which can further manipulate the properties, such as block collisions, where currently, obviously, it blocks me. We can disable that and cruise right on through. It still activates the various callbacks, so that's useful for doing stuff like trigger events and whatnot without blocking the player. So even if a component itself is relatively simple, you can see how it can be utilized in a bunch of different ways. So to do other examples here, just disable the visual mode, as we have some objects over here, and you can see if we walk over to it and we look at it, we have a little pop-up, an object is highlighted, and if I were to hit a keybind, which initiates a use command, for example, that one made it disappear, and if we go over to this light and we use it, that makes the light disappear. So these are various examples. So if we were to open up the editor again, and we click the entity we just used for the light we turned off, we can go in here and we can see that we have collisions, so we can, detect events and stuff like that. But more importantly, we have several components here. So we have an interactable component, which if we edit this so we can see the script file, we have our use callback, which calls to the owner to notify that an uninteracted event happened and passed along who the user was. And what notify does is simply passes along a particular command call and various parameters to all components that entity has under it. So when we hit our interact button, that triggers a use command, which is passed up to the server, and we use essentially the interact component, which then passes along to any other component that has the uninteracted method. So in this case, we have a candle item component, which I know has an uninteracted, and what that does is we get the object, we get the first object of the owner, and we disable it. I know for a fact that if we go in here, we'll note the first object under this entity is a light. So essentially, through this system, we have created a light switch. So we interact, the use command is called, we notify any and all components with the onInteracted function, in this case our candle item component. We do the interacted call, we get the light, we turn it off. So, and obviously, we have a huge spread of other components. For fun, we can pop out here and select that player object we've been running around with. And to prove my point on how flexible all this business is, you can see our mesh components, you can see an FPS control component, you have the camera, the orbiter, which enables the third-person view functionality, and that directly interacts with the camera component, obviously. We have an animation component. The box doesn't have any animations, but it would allow animations to be played on the mesh, so those interact. The collision component can reference the mesh component. The player controller component basically enables the physics, so when we're jumping before we move around as according to the code, that's all handled by the player controller component, which references the collision component. And then we have our interact component, which is how we kicked off that interact event. So this just updates as part of the regular tick, fires off the raycast, which is how we get that cool little pop-up informing us that we've highlighted it. And then if we hit an event, we can do the onInteract. And then from here, all that physics stuff and whatnot is actually done because this is a game object, which is something I will be covering in the next update. So game object asset, Fox player. And if we go in here to highlight, you can see this is a thing that exists. And that is similar to prefabs, but actually has a ton more functionality involved, and I will be going over that one in the next update. So hopefully this is a decent example on how you can very easily create a bunch of surprisingly complex objects entirely in script and through components, and rapidly iterate and customize. And again, these various components, the interactable, the candle, interact, all the different components that are listed in here, the FPS controls, these are all done entirely in script. There are a bunch of engine level components such as the rendering, the collisions, but most gameplay components in this example here are actually done purely in script. So you can see how that would allow you to iterate incredibly quickly and, well, pretty much just focus on game development. So again, hopefully this was a good example, and as always, just let me know if there's anything you'd like covered or further articulated upon.